This is Creating Your Encore Career and Becoming a Silver Entrepreneur with your host, Lynn Freest. Lynn will share ideas and expert advice from people that are walking in your shoes and living their encore careers, where they want and at the pace they want. You'll start a company of one with confidence and knowledge to live a fulfilled life of freedom and ease. Lynn is a coach and leadership consultant whose mission is to show senior leaders and experts how to start something refreshing and new after a full career in the corporate environment.
Welcome to this episode of the podcast, Creating Your Encore Career. This is episode 100, and it's on why I am pivoting my podcast to the Encore Career from leading the factory forward. My goal is to help you create a compelling future for yourself in an Encore career, or as I like to say, as a silver entrepreneur. But I'll also be sharing ideas on how companies can connect with the talent that you could provide for them. Now, I encourage you to visit my website and download the summary at the bottom of the podcast episode and use that as a tool to capture notes as you explore the concepts of this episode. So again, in this episode, we'll be talking about why I'm pivoting my podcast. Just as the title says, I want to be creating your encore career and becoming a silver entrepreneur. I want you to be able to work where you want, work when you want, and work at the pace you want. So I'm going to go through three things here. First, why am I changing? And then 3 reasons behind that change. Then 4 actions that you can take to succeed in developing your encore career. So why am I changing? I started my podcast to help manufacturing leaders. And my goal was to help them create a compelling future for themselves, their teams, and their organizations. So I focused on things like leadership skills, organizational skills, learning and development, and technology. What I've seen in both the media and in conversation with manufacturers is that while these things are still big issues, the clear number one issue is talent and the workforce. Many people are working towards bringing new talent into the workforce. So I didn't need to do another voice for that kind of work. So I decided to focus on the experienced workforce that may be on the sidelines, either by choice or not by choice. This experienced workforce could provide the needed expertise and skills, especially for small and medium-sized companies. Also, they could serve as coaches and mentors to the new talent that small and medium-sized companies need, but that they don't have the time and attention to really develop. I believe that I can also help small and medium-sized companies learn to engage with and utilize this pool of encore talent. We'll talk about that more in later episodes. Finally, the pandemic has unfrozen a lot of our assumptions about how and where work can be done. So let's get started. My friend Mike Kim, who has a new book coming out titled You Are the Brand, and he talks about how people can become entrepreneurs and market themselves. He starts out by asking 3 questions to people who want to start their own business. What pisses you off? What breaks your heart? And what's the big problem that you solve? All thought-inspiring questions. So what are my answers to these questions? What pisses you off? That in the face of significant talent shortage, we have a tremendous amount of talent sitting on the sidelines, that experienced workforce. And we simply don't know how to engage with it. And they don't know how to engage with small and medium-sized businesses, or even corporations. So what breaks your heart? The fact that talented people could be spending 10, 20, or even 30 years in, quote, retirement, wishing they could still be contributing in some way. I really believe many of these people, if they had the ways to do it, they'd love to continue contributing. So what's the big problem that I'm going to try to solve? I'm going to be helping people who do want to start an encore career learn the skills and processes that will make them successful as a company of one. And that, by the way, is the title of a book by Paul Jarvis. Moving on then, Mike has 2 more questions that he presents to people. How did you learn that? And how did you make that happen? How did I learn what I'm now teaching? In 2009, I started exploring what it might be like to leave corporate world and become a coach and consultant. I had already been coaching within my company for many years. I grabbed every book on consulting that I could find to see how it might be done. I also grabbed every book on being an external coach and how that field worked. It was then in 2015 that I finally retired and started my encore career. And it came time to learn the nuts and bolts of being an independent business person. I attended a variety of seminars and learned a lot of ways to run an independent business. I had some early success and got a consulting contract that ran for several years. I now think that may have actually held me back because my time and attention and energy were taken up working on the contract and not really building my business for the long term. So how did you make that happen? I'll go into this later, but it was an intense desire to learn, a willingness to change my mindset, which has been a hard thing to do, and a slowly developing willingness to practice in public. Again, something I was reluctant to do, practice in public. So now, who is it I'm trying to help? Who are you, the people I want to help? You're leaving a corporate career and you want to start an Encore career. You would like to become a company of one. And you may also want to leave a legacy of skills for others to use in their future careers. Now, I go back to some things I've studied. What are 3 key shifts happening in the world that really make Encore careers both possible and needed? One is a demographic shift. Over 28 million boomers are retired, my contemporaries, and we're adding about 2 million each year. Now, as McKinsey has said, to have enough people participating in the economy to sustain our overall way of life, we need to have more talent in that economy. And that would be some of the people like my contemporaries. The second change is a longevity shift. As one author, Linda Grattan, has written a book titled The 100-Year Life. It used to be that if people retired or left the workforce in their 60s, there were only a few years in front of them. But now it could easily be 30 years in front of them. So what are you going to do to both keep yourself interested and engaged and also finance that extended period of possibly 30 years after leaving a corporate career? And from the company's viewpoint, they have all this talent out there. They have a shortage of talent. How can they make use of the fact that they've got people who now want to work differently than they did when they were in their traditional corporate jobs? And finally, there's a technology shift. Now, we think technology will take our jobs, but other authors had said they'll just change our jobs. Now, it's a double-edged sword for us as the boomers. We do have to be intentional about learning new pieces of technology. On the flip side of that is that new technology makes it more possible than ever to actually start a business of your own on your own. You don't need to hire all the skills as full-time employees. And the technology takes care of some of the skills, so you don't have to hire them at all. So in the end, the technology shift is both our challenge and our friend as we consider an Encore career or becoming a silver entrepreneur. So maybe just a little more about my story that you may have gotten in an earlier podcast. In my career in corporate life, I mainly handled administrative roles. Figuratively speaking, I made the trains run efficiently and made them run on time. But really, as I got into my career, I wanted to always move into a learning development role. And it was probably around 2008. I applied for a position as a manager in learning development. I felt well qualified, and I'd prepared a good resume and was sure I could bring real value to the role. When I didn't get the interview, I wanted to know why. So I talked to Stan, who was a leader in learning development I knew and respected. He'd always been thoughtful and helpful. So he acknowledged my experience and my skills, but said there was a lot of competition for the position. And then he said, "Lynn, this is considered a developmental position." Well, I was crushed. It was the first time I'd run into the possibility that my age and experience might be held against me. The questions that I had that he couldn't answer, why couldn't I fit into a 3-year role? Or why does having a shorter timeline in my career limit me now? So my Encore journey began. I still wanted to grow in my career, so I began to look for opportunities that might exist outside the company. I'd worked for the company, but I still wanted to grow in my career and maybe on a different path. I wanted to create my ideal role and thrive. So again, my name is Lynn, and I'm in an Encore career, and I'm a silver entrepreneur. I went from the slide rule and paper engineering documents to simulations and video documentation. I'm an industrial engineer by both education and natural inclination. I've always been fascinated by how people and technology come together to create value. Now, some of the lessons that I learned in my journey as an Encore career. An entrepreneurial mindset and a corporate mindset are very different, and we'll go into that in a little more detail. Also, I had defined myself and my value in a traditional way. I had defined myself with past positions and work experiences, just as you normally would on a traditional resume. The titles that I had reflected administrative experience, such as production engineering, labor relations, and not as much a developmental experience. So just listing positions wasn't really letting people know what I could do for them. And even though in many of these positions, I was actively helping people develop and implement change. So in my way of thinking, there are 4 key steps that can help you start and be successful in an Encore career. The first step, and often it's overlooked, but it's probably the most difficult one, is develop your mindset as an entrepreneur. The second step will be to define your expertise and create the value statement that you will share with people. How are they going to know what you can do for them? In the third step, explore what you need in your Encore Career Toolbox. There are some new skills, new technologies, things that you're going to have to know that maybe weren't relevant in your corporate career. And then finally, fourth, and again, this is something people often overlook or step over, decide how you will create your practice plan to build your new career, very intentionally practice the skills you need, and importantly, decide which ones to practice when. Again, a good friend of mine, Mike Kim, has said, success is sequential, not simultaneous. So you won't be able to do everything all at once, but you'll need to identify the key things to practice and take action on right now. So let's begin talking about your journey. First, this is all possible. I can share with you the lessons I've learned over the last 5 years. And with that, I believe you can go farther and faster. I always like this quote from Steve Jobs, and it's part of a longer quote in his graduation address. Have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary. So this is true whether it's college graduates just starting in their career or whether it's experienced people who are starting an Encore career. So let's go back to the 4 steps now. Developing your mindset. Here are some key ideas that will be important. You have to have a growth mindset. You may know how to do things, many things that you already know, but you still have to have that growth mindset. I can learn something new. You have to look at what's possible. And then you really have to have that phrase internalized, I don't know how to do this yet, as opposed to I don't know how to do it. I just don't know how to do it yet. Another gentleman by the name of Gay Hendricks wrote a book called The Big Leap, and he said, you need to go and intentionally decide what's your upper limit. What's the most that you think you can do? Because that actually will decide what you can do. So be intentional about saying, I want to serve 1,000 people, or I want to serve people on a global basis, whatever it may be. Be sure your upper limit isn't too low. Then in terms of mindset, you need to be both an expert and a learner. You're going to be the master in some skills, which is your particular expertise, but you're going to be the apprentice as far as some of the entrepreneurial skills. So again, you have to have that mindset of both the expert and the learner. Now, another thing is in the corporate world, and I came from a manufacturing corporate world, we had Six Sigma. We wanted to be 99.9% sure we were right before we did something. Didn't want to have any failures. In practice, in the entrepreneurial world, if you're 65% right, you got to take action. And again, you're going to have to pivot. So some of this it's really a mindset thing. It's not that the world is any different. It's just how you look at it. Then in step 2, defining your expertise. As I mentioned earlier, this goes beyond your job titles. You have to consider, what have people asked you about? You've handled the exceptions in life. What are the things that you have seen over your experience and career that maybe others, especially new talent, haven't even seen yet? The things that happen once in a while. Or again, people have asked you about things over and over in your career. Understand that these are questions that many people will continue to have. Another thing is you've worked with people a lot. New talent, they may not have been used to working with people in the setting or in the area of your expertise. So you really have to think about all the experience you had working with people and how you can help others do that. And then at some point, you need to create your ideal customer. Sometimes people call it an avatar. You have to think about, in your career, who was it you really enjoyed working with and what defined them? Now, you don't want to be too narrow. You don't want to just work with people your age or something like that. But there are people who had attitudes, they had perceptions, perspectives. There are people that you just enjoyed working with. And so those are the basis of what you might be looking for as far as who you're going to work with in your Encore career. I think some specifics, you may have had experience in quality and safety. You can go out and help organizations or new leaders not make the mistakes that you've seen over the years. You've seen them, you know how to fix them, how to avoid them, more importantly. If your expertise was in quality and safety, there's a wealth of things that you could share with organizations, especially small and medium-sized organizations that haven't had the time to think about those in a deep way. Or maybe you had experience in supply chain management. You know, how to make a supply chain resilient. What are the questions you need to ask as far as suppliers and whether or not you can evaluate whether they are going to be able to supply you through hiccups in the system. And third, you could be in a role where you're, again, helping new talent develop. You can help them from getting derailed. What are the leadership conversations, the skills they need to master? What are the things where you've seen leaders derail themselves through their own lack of understanding or inaction? You've had some of those experiences. You can pass that on to others also. Then we get into step 3, which is building your Encore Career Toolbox. Now, I think of this toolbox as having 4 sections to it: people skills, technology skills, business skills, and marketing skills. Now, these are just categories I made up, but they reflect, I think, a good mix of what you need to have as a silver entrepreneur or in your Encore career. People skills. As we talked earlier, you need to create your message. You need to decide how you will connect with people. In your corporate career, it could very well be that the position, they came to you because you had a role that they needed. In today's world, you have to go out and reach out to people who need you but may not know who you are. You also need to learn to listen. I think if you were successful in your careers, you did know how to listen. But now this is a whole new ballgame. You're out talking to people who don't know you, to organizations that you're not familiar with. So really being able to learn how to listen is going to be important. Then we go to the technology skills. You have to decide on things that, are you going to have your home base as your LinkedIn profile? Are you going to have a website? How might you use social media so you can connect with the people that you want to work with? And you'll have to select some tech tools, whether it be hosting a blog or a podcast or how do you do videos. All those things are things at least to be considered. You don't do them all at once. You try to find the one you may be most comfortable with or the one that will give you the most impact. The next part of your toolbox is going to be business skills. Again, consulting business basics, how to form an LLC, liability insurance, accounting, taxes. All of these things you probably didn't have to be concerned about in your corporate career, but now all of a sudden you need these roles. And again, you may have to hire people to do these things. You don't have to become an expert in all of them yourself. And then finally, in building your Encore Career Toolbox, it's marketing skills. A lot of that becomes discovering where your customers are. Are they at trade shows? Are they in LinkedIn? Are they in associations? Where might you find your customers, literally? You have to start uncovering their pain points. Now, in your experience, you've probably dealt with some things. You probably have some pretty good ideas of where to start. But you have to go out there and say you're going to work with small and medium-sized companies. You really have to start uncovering and learning what their pain points are. And then you have to decide how is it you're going to help them solve their most immediate and most pressing problems. As a friend of mine said, what's their bleeding neck wound? What's the absolute thing they have to get solved today or before? And how can you help them do that? In the end, the marketing is about, again, for my friend Mike Ken, it's about opening a relationship, not closing a sale. Enabling the customer to know, like, and trust you so that they can do business with you. Now, the fourth step is to create your blueprint for your practice plan. Think about what's the next best step. You can't do it all at once, but what's the next best thing? And probably it revolves around some of those earlier things. Intentionally thinking through your mindset, intentionally deciding who your ideal customer might be, some of those things. And then you have to actually schedule your work and be intentional. The corporate world gave us all kinds of structure around work, around what we did, when we did it. Now you're on your own, and it's easy to get lost wandering around, jumping on every little bright, shiny object that you see. So you have to have a plan, and you have to schedule your work. So again, my blueprint, the first step was develop your mindset as an entrepreneur. The second was define your expertise and create the value statement that you will share with people. The third step, explore what you need in your Encore Career Toolbox. And fourth, decide how you will create your practice plan. Going back to my own experience, so what are the key actions that I took to move ahead? Obviously, I chose to retire. Actually, just before that, I went to a conference called Permission to Prosper. It was a conference to help people understand how to share their visions of what was possible as far as doing independent work. It wasn't my normal business convention. It wasn't something I'd really had much comfort in. But I went there because it was a lot of people talking about how they were going to share what they know with the world. Later on, I joined a mastermind group. And this is a group of people that may be led by an expert, but on the other hand, there also is a lot to be said for peer learning. If you're learning how to do something with a group of 4, 5, 6 others, you can really get farther and faster as a group. I also decided to hire a virtual assistant. I can speak well, I can write okay, but I needed somebody to really polish my message as far as copywriting or the whole idea of how can my words be put together better than maybe I naturally would. So I hired a person to do that. I also hired a person to produce my podcast. Many people have learned all the details of how to create and publish a podcast, but I thought that's not where my value add is for a business. And it's not a value add for me to spend my time learning these skills. I'm having somebody else do that for me. But that whole idea of the podcast, leading the factory forward and now creating your Encore career, it helped me not only connect with people and share some of my thinking, but it helped sharpen my thinking. I felt like I'd turned pro when I started the discipline of a weekly podcast, as you're listening to right now. That's when I really felt that I was in business, I'll say. So what does my world look like now? Well, it's still an ongoing journey. I am not a master by any stretch of the imagination. I'm still on a journey, but I can help serve as your guide if you need it. I continue to make a contribution through coaching and consulting. I believe my podcast provides value. People have said they enjoy the ideas I share with them. I've been able to connect to a worldwide group of people that I can collaborate with and learn from and share with. And then obviously, as a company of one, I have a great freedom of choice. So let's create your new story. You can create your path forward. You can go farther and faster because of what I've learned on my journey. You can move from the old world of corporate work and into your Encore career. You can develop your wisdom and knowledge into something people will seek you out for. Now, it doesn't mean everybody wants to have this Encore career. You may choose to just do volunteer work as far as sharing your knowledge. You may choose total retirement, saying, I'm just done. I'm going to do other things in life. But in an Encore career, you may be able to take off 2 months for a vacation every year or 4 months. You will decide, again, where you're working and when you're working. So can you imagine this? Being independent and choosing what to work on, sharing your talents, but living the lifestyle that you want, working when you want, where you want, and at the pace you want, create a virtual team and yet remain a company of one, and then build a legacy by helping new talent to develop. So that's wrapping up this episode 100 of my Pivot. My deepest thanks to you, my wonderful listeners. I humbly appreciate they have chosen to spend time with me over these 100 episodes. And I look forward to sharing more ideas around creating an Encore career, still talking about leadership, emotional intelligence, and manufacturing. And then here's simply a quick review of what we covered in this episode. Why I'm pivoting my focus. I want to help people start an Encore career. The 3 reasons it's important from the world's point of view, and the 4 steps to help you get started. And as always, I encourage you to visit my website and download the summary at the bottom of the podcast episode as you start exploring the ideas from this episode. So I want to help you. Work where you want, work when you want to, and work at the pace you want to. And finally, I mentioned earlier my friend Mike Kim, who has a new book coming out titled You Are the Brand, and it's about how people can become entrepreneurs and market themselves. So I encourage you, there'll be a link in the show notes that you can go take a look at that book. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.